Well, I'd like to take the opportunity on this ramble, and I literally am out for a ramble again today. So hopefully, the wind doesn't blow across the microphone too much, and I shouldn't think it would because I'll be walking in a sort of a sheltered area. Like there's plenty of trees around and that. So plus I have a hood up, so my phone's under the hood, so that should provide a bit of shelter for it as well. So look, if there is a little bit of crosswind blowing over the microphone, don't worry, it'll go away because I'm moving. Um, yeah. Anyway, I want to dedicate this ramble um, in tribute to one of my favourite pipers, Paddy Keenan, um, and I kind of want to say, without going on about it too much from the start, like, you know, people go on about things like, who's the greatest piper of all time, and all the old greats from the past, the black and white film clips and recordings that were made in the past, and so many times you see the title sort of thing, like the king of all the pipers and this sort of stuff. I'm not into that, being honest with you. I'm not going to say that Paddy Keenan is the greatest piper of all time, or he's the king of the piper, or even that he's my favourite piper of all time, because, well, first of all, I'm not into doing that. It's not a competition, and I always believed that music wasn't a competitive sport. Um, but what I will say about it is that certain pipers mean certain things to certain people, and everyone has their own tastes. Everyone has their own sort of styles and their own way of walking and their own way of talking. And I think we can identify, it depends on sort of your personality, or even the mood that you're in, or sometimes even the state of life that you're in, that place that you are in life. Like, um, certain types of music is going to appeal to you in different ways. So, um, yeah, I just don't like saying someone's the greatest piper of all time, or I don't even like saying that they're my personal favourite piper either, because there's several people who could come very close to that. But certainly up there with the top, my top few would be Paddy Keenan and Finbar Fury as well. I'll do another one, I think, about Finbar. So look, I'm not an expert on this man Paddy Keenan. I never met the man. I've never been that fortunate to meet him. As I've said before in some of my other YouTube videos, like, I'm a nobody in the world of piping. I'm a complete nobody. I'm a novice. Still learning, always learning. But I don't even play the uilleann pipes anymore at the moment. I'm playing mostly Scottish small pipes, so it's a different world. But that appeal for uilleann pipes is still in me, and I'm still drawn to it all the time. And I find myself more often than not drawn back to the music, and I don't know whether style is the right word, but definitely the music of Paddy Keenan. So I just thought I'd like to dedicate at least a couple of episodes to him anyhow. So this is kind of like an introductory to what I've done. As I say, I've never met the man myself, so I've never been fortunate enough to actually ask him these questions, or interview him myself. So what I've done in the next part of this, that I'd encourage you to watch and to listen to, is I've done three things basically. I bought an amazing book about the travelling musicians of Ireland. It's called Free Spirits, and I'm going to do a little book review about that. So it's definitely, I recommend it if you're interested in this. Obviously you're interested in this, otherwise you wouldn't be listening. But like, it's definitely a reference book. I think that anyone who's has any sort of a depth of interest in uilleann pipe and the traditions and the backgrounds behind it, this is definitely one for yourself. Yeah, it's called Free Spirits, and I'll do a little book review about that. So what I've done is I've read out parts out of the chapter about the Keenan family and about Paddy mostly in particular. It gives you a fair bit. Plus there's two fairly good interviews that was done. One of them is online at the moment. It's probably the only in-depth sort of lengthy interview that's done with Paddy. But I also had another one on an old DVD that was recorded probably, I don't know, 20 years ago now, probably the early 2000s or something. And I have it on a DVD, and I tried to upload it onto YouTube, but it won't let me for some reason. I can't even transfer it into my own computer. I can't replicate the files or whatever. So you just have to be patient with it. What I had to do was play it basically and put my phone in front of the telly. But I know it's a bit shy because the picture image is a bit shit and the sound quality is a bit shit. In fact, I had to record the sound quality twice and redub it over and bring up the volume because you could barely even hear it, and the focus unfortunately keeps going on and in and out. And look, it's really fucking irritating, I know, but it's worth it because to me it's the better interview out of the two. So if you can ignore the focus on the phone pulling in and out, most of it's fine, especially actually when he's playing his pipes. You can see his fingers moving on the keys and the regulator keys and moving up and down the chanter. It's grand, and you can hear the audio. It's not too bad. So it's not the quality obviously of sitting and watching a decent DVD, but I thought it was worthwhile because to me, whatever that man says about pipes and piping is worthwhile. It's worth having. So what I've done is I've read out part of that book. I think that's about a 20-minute recording. And then there's the interview that I had to do with the phone, and then there's another interview already on YouTube. So I sort of combined them all, and I'd encourage us to watch them and to listen to what the man has to say, and take in his piper and hopefully you'll get something out of it and learn something out of it. So I suppose this is my ramble. This is my sort of waffle into my introduction into into my tribute to him. So to sort of get around to the question of, well, why Paddy Keenan? Like, what is it about him? This different way about him, this style, this and what it is it's so hard to explain it, like, but there's just such depth in that man. And as I said to you earlier, right, I've never met him, but just from what my impression of him is, it's like there's so much depth and knowledge and kind of mood and like there's just like there's layers. There's this silence with him as well. He seems to be, like, to me, like a man that doesn't sort of waste words. I would say he's a great man to sort of sum things up. He's a great way to, he says what has to be said and explains things, unlike me, who rabbits on for ages. He just sort of drives the pin into the heart of the matter. And sometimes, probably most of the time, I think he doesn't have to say anything at all, because it's like when you see that depth and that silence behind his eyes, you know that actually words in the English language will not be able to express what he's thinking or feeling, or what he wants to relate to you. And so the pipes then are the pipes are the means and the method, the conveyance, I suppose, the vehicle, that the you know the messenger by which he's going to express this thing to you. So that's the whole brilliance of it with me. Once he lifts his pipes and pushes the air through them and begins to express himself and to play, then there is no need for words. And you see him too, and he quietly sort of sits there, almost like a lonely figure, almost in a room. Like, how could you be lonely in a room full of but it's like as if he is. It's like, it's a strange paradox with him, because in one way, like, he's sort of like, he has his head bowed down and he's in his own world. He's entered into that hypnotic world of the pipes that I think we all love. If you're still listening to this, if you like any of me videos or whatever, I try to explain that world and where it brings us, that we're not escaping from it. We're actually going, we're diving head first and deep into it. And there's a magnetism there. There's just even his figure, his persona, his presence there. The way him and his pipes are one thing then. And as I say, he has his head bowed down and his hat on his head, and he's not being distracted by anyone or anything that's around him, and then he's just expressing himself in all that depth. He's pouring himself into the pipes, and it's oozing out the other end. The pipes is like a filter, and it's not just a filter. It's bringing things to life. Like, it's bringing that silence, basically, to speaking to you. And I don't know, you might say to yourself, yeah, you could say that about any pipe or any musician, but I don't know. I don't get the same from other pipers. Not in that deep way. And I've noticed he uses the word a lot, mood. It's like, one of the questions I remember he's asked in one of the interviews is, what mood are you trying to convey? And it was the wrong question, because he says, I'm not trying to he said something along the like, I'm not trying to convey a mood. It's the mood that I am just in. It's the place that he goes to, and it's the moods that are evoked in that place that he goes to. A lot of them, I would imagine, are memories. And he's expressing those memories and thoughts and the moods of probably a former time, and even former people, maybe from long ago, maybe a century ago, maybe 2 centuries ago. He's evoking those memories to bring you back in time, even. But he's not like laying out a stall and going, all right, look, this is the mood I'm in, and I'm gonna make you all feel like this. Like, it's not like he's sort of trying to put this thing on. This is just what's happening in the here and now. So, hang on, it's just lashing rain. I'm just going to stand under a tree. Luckily enough, there's a tree. So, yeah, I don't quite get the same depths with other pipers quite as much as what I have to say for Paddy Keenan. As I said, it's all behind there's those eyes. There's a silence there sometimes where he just, as I say, he doesn't even have to speak, and he doesn't actually say a whole lot anyway, because there's, out of all the hours of stuff that you spend on YouTube looking for interviews with him, I only found one of any sort of substance that's more than like 2 or 3 minutes long, you know. Well, 2, but that's not even on YouTube, so that's why I uploaded the one that I have, which I think is sort of it's actually a slightly better interview, because he's being interviewed by another piper who understands the instrument and understands that world of the instrument, and he's being asked kind of like the right questions. You know, there's all those standard questions like how did you start music and when did you take up the pipes, and then you joined the Botti band and then you went to England and all this. But in the first interview, if you do watch my video of the interviews, you'll understand that the interviewer is on a better, more understanding level with him, because he's a piper himself, so he's asking other kinds of questions that maybe a non-piper, well, I'm sure a non-piper wouldn't sort of have the capacity to ask. So as I say, I think interviews with him are sort of rare, so they're precious, and when he does actually open up and speak English instead of speaking music, he's well worth listening to. And I think, I hope you can still hear me. It's raining quite heavily. That's just the rain on the leaves, if you can hear in background noise. I think there's something else going on as well that I just want to sort of touch on, but I think this deserves a whole other ramble topic all on its own. It occurred to me as well, and I've said this sort of briefly before about women pipers as well, but seeing as we're on the topic of Paddy Keenan, there was something that I noticed in the music of Paddy Keenan and Finbar Fury that I felt like isn't there or wasn't there in older recordings or whatever of others, musicians. There's an element that they have that other pipers, no matter to me how good of a piper they were or how much I liked them in other respects and manners, that was missing from the tunes. I would say especially the slow airs. And again, I was kind of thinking for ages, well, like, what is that? You know, what's this thing? And then it kind of occurred to me, or maybe it was explained, so I don't know. But, you know, is there such a thing, like, as, you know, like, is it the travelling people? Is there a spirit, I don't know, in the travelling people that isn't in settled people? Or maybe it is in some of us, and maybe it's long gone or it's long dormant because we've been, I don't know, stationary for so long, and we haven't, most of us, experienced the rest of Ireland like the travelling people would have. I know things are different nowadays and traditions change or whatever, but still a lot of the travelling people still do travel around, and they still go up and down the length of Ireland playing music and singing and stuff like that. So there's still elements of it, like alive or whatever. And I think perhaps, like, the social context of us between travelling people and settled people, like there is a different dynamic kind of going on, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. I'm trying to understand it. Like I think Paddy put it very well when he said something along the lines of somebody born with a silver spoon and in a goose feather bed is going to play differently to somebody who was born in a tent on the side of the road. They haven't lived the same sorts of lives, and they haven't had the same sorts of hardships, and they haven't even come from the same kind of culture, really. And that really sort of struck a chord with me, because it made me think back of an older thing of, and this goes back to the days of the pastoral pipes, or the pre-runner to the uilleann pipes, like the union pipes, which I've done a couple of other talks about those histories. But there is a sort of two worlds to the early, when he said that someone born with the silver spoon and the feather bed, that straight away reminded me of those gentleman pipers from the last century, which there were quite a few of. Like we have to give them credit as well. It kind of, in my sort of discovery of uilleann pipes, like the development and evolution of uilleann pipes, a lot of it came about by and from people with money, who had the money to spend on these beautiful, intricate instruments. In a way, I love it. It's like the revolving wheel of a cart that it keeps coming back around on itself. Like, I'll just sort of really briefly sort of describe what I've learned about it, or my understanding of it, at least anyway, was that smaller bagpipes were always played in Ireland and Scotland alongside the bigger bagpipes, what became known as Irish war pipes and the Great Highland bagpipes of today. But smaller bagpipes were always there, and they always had their place. So they didn't necessarily evolve straight out of the bigger ones and got smaller and quieter as time went on, which I used to believe. I now seen sort of evidence and seen examples of that there were smaller sets of pipes being played in Ireland and Scotland, by and large by the peasantry, mostly by people from the Gaelic traditions, by the poor people basically. And in the 1700s there was this renewal of interest in the kind of things that were actually disappearing in the 1700s. So people with money, aristocracy in the 1700s, were looking at sort of traditions that were disappearing in their own times around them. And they had this fondness for the pastoral scene, or the pastoral scene, which was sort of involved kind of the countryside and kind of, beautiful landscapes, mountains and rivers and valleys, and the people who were earthed in that, like the poorer people, the farmers, the workers, the labourers who actually had to toil in the land and get their hands dirty. They were part of the land themselves. And a lot of it was as well in relation to shepherds. And the wealthier people kind of like romanticised this kind of rustic kind of idyll, or this sort of like idyllic kind of way of life, like the lonesome shepherd sort of like, looking after his flocks, like kind of. And there was all sort of paintings and poetries done of this kind of stylised, romanticised, rural sort of landscape of kind of poor people and peasants sort of lazing around on warm rocks in the sunshine, like, and somebody's sort of sitting there with their feet in a beautiful pool of a river, fishing and things like that. And part of all of this world, of the artistic world and the poetry and song of the time and the music of the time, was the bagpipe. And especially the smaller sets of bagpipes. So they they were interested in, because the smaller sets of bagpipes were being played by these sort of poorer people and kind of living in sort of like little thatched cottages and sort of rustic kind of romanticised sort of hovels basically, and the pipes were a rustic type of instrument that they had. Um, but the basics of this is that like these smaller pipes were a little bit too rustic. They're a little bit too kind of rough and ready, and they couldn't kind of be played in sort of kind of chamber music or sort of early orchestras with other instruments, because they were quite individual and locally made, and they weren't sort of perfect pitch or concert pitch anything and so ever. So the more moneyed class of people were drawn to this whole thing, and in a strange way they preserved it, which I think is a good counter story to the old sort of stuff that, oh well, the English and the British tried to ban everything that was Irish and Gaelic. This is what we're told all the time. But there's a whole face to this that we're not sort of told much about, and I think that story can be told in the history of uilleann pipes. That actually people, the gentry, which were largely, with, let's face it, Protestant and had money and kind of, you know, the British identity was very much their thing instead of a uniquely Irish kind of Celtic identity, Gaelic or whatever. But they expressed a genuine interest in the people's folk music and folk traditions before they disappeared, as I say, with all this romantic movement. And I think the reason why it was romanticised in my mind anyway was that they were moving apart from, they were too comfortable. They were too comfortable, like with their silver spoons and their feather beds, and you know, they're sort of, you know, having the servants kind of come in the back entrance so you wouldn't have to look at them, like preparing the fire and stuff like that. And they were actually getting further and further removed from nature and the whole world that they were living in of sort of like commerce and, you know, like they were talking, you know, like the empire and profits and business and cities, and the Industrial Revolution was kicking off and factories were starting to be built and stuff. And I think there was a genuine sort of sense of loss for their place in the natural world, in the environment. A little bit like today, the way everyone's sort of green crazy now and sort of organic this and organic that. But deep down, we all love to get back to the countryside. We do. We love a walk. Like me, I'm walking now in the rain on the edge of a wood. I'm lucky. There's lots of people who live in urban areas who'd love to be able to do this now. So we all have that longing for the natural world and the countryside, and this sort of gentrified class had that, like in the 1700s. So to finally get to what my whole point is, they invested in these more primitive, rustic sort of styles of bagpipes and brought them on. They evolved them into more sort of modern instruments. So I believe like clarinet makers had a lot to do with it as well, and refined them so much so that they could be played by the gentry in polite company and polite society. Instruments that could be played in unison with each other, that were in key with each other, that there was a sort of that there was a standard that you could travel from London to Edinburgh and over to Dublin and over to Galway and play with other musicians with similar instruments, because this was the scene, and this was the places that these pipes were being made. Very early uilleann pipes, or pastoral pipes, or union pipes if you want to call them that, were being made in London and Edinburgh and Dublin. So by the gentry, by people with money. So we shouldn't always come up with this thing that, you know, everything that was Irish they tried to ban. I think we need to sort of face the facts and tell some truths about that. But the whole irony of it is that it started off being a rustic thing, then it becomes gentrified and more sort of polished, and then sort of by the time of like sort of the 1830s, kind of going into the famine times, the gentry kind of weren't so much into them anymore, and so the sort of poorer classes then took them up. Well, they were kind of continuing on in their own tradition anyway, but now, fortunately for them, there was these sort of much more perfectly made, sort of more expensive sets of pipes kind of actually kind of becoming available, and being made maybe afresh, like lads copying off other old sets. Like one of the sets I came across was made completely out of ivory and silver. I mean, that's money. Like the whole set was made out of there's no wood on the set. I think it was Lord Edward Fitzgerald's set of pipes. Doesn't where you would normally have wood. This was just pure ivory and silver, mounts and all that. So the pipes, the uilleann pipes, then were refined and made their way then back down through sort of society, through the tiers and levels of society, which I think is a good thing, because they ended up, some of these beautiful instruments ended up back in the hands of the, we'll say, peasantry or poorer people. And then those sets then were copied and developed another little bit and whatever. And so the instrument evolves and develops and kind of comes around full circle. But there were these gentleman pipers throughout the 1800s and even into the early 1900s who were still gentlemen. Funny enough, it was a lot of Protestant clergy played pipes, sometimes to substitute church organs. In some circles of Protestant sort of society, there was sort of long-running arguments about whether organs were suitable for church music, and so I think some of them ministers got around it by sort of saying, well, look, here's a like miniature organ kind of thing. I don't know 100% on that one, but for some reason a lot of Protestant clergy played early uilleann pipes and union pipes. But also, as I say, so did the poorer people. Which brings me back to what Paddy Keenan said. When he said that about the silver spoon and the feather bed, the person who plays that tune, the person who plays from that background compared to the person who was born in a tent, or we'll say a hovel on the side of the road, there is going to be a difference in sound, and there's going to be a difference in mood and feeling and experience even of life that piper is going to put into the pipes. So I think this is going to be a topic actually that's worth looking into. The difference between kind of, we'll say, settled people playing uilleann pipes down through time and history, and the travelling people who were playing, pipes simultaneously. And I kind of see them as sort of two different tributaries that have now kind of flown into the one river, like into the one stream. That's the way I see that nowadays. But it makes sense that, even though in his words when he said that, because even the way he said like a feather bed, like, when was the last time people had feather beds? Like, he's even taking you back in time by using that. And a silver spoon, yeah, okay, we'd still say someone's born with a silver spoon in their mouth. But it's like, in that one phrase, he took me back at least 200 years to that time that I've just described, and how the instrument evolved, and two kind of different classes of people that end up playing the instrument. But that can also be said of even today's generation, like within living memory. I think what he was talking about in his life, now I can't speak for him, but this is just the impression I got off his the few words he said that very well summed it all up. Many travelling people, even in our own lifetimes in Ireland, have suffered like all sorts of problems, like social problems and like whatever, poverty, and not given the same opportunities or whatever as settled people might have had. And basically not as like privileged with regard to money maybe and social status or whatever, but in my eyes would be much more privileged with a richer sense of heritage maybe and culture and older ways that they clung onto, that settled people or more moneyed people abandoned or let go of or lost. Um, so even, as I say, even in today's world, like that, there is still some differences with like ways of life and attitudes and traditions and stuff like that that probably carry on in the music. Although I think they're becoming less and less as time goes on. Um, maybe it's for the best, and maybe it's not. I think there's a sort of a payoff between gaining something and losing something. But I think his words rung hit home to me as well, because that's not to say that everyone who came from a settled like place like ever had wealth either. And I find that as well, that like, well, I'm just going to say it out straight. We didn't have much money when we were growing up in my house, and I grew up in a corporation council estate in Dublin as well, like he did in Ballyfermot. I grew up in Ballybrack. Similar sort of circumstances, unemployment. There's a bit of work going, there's not, whatever. Unemployment, the dole. Even there was times that, and I don't want to like keep, I think I'm a victim or anything like that, but there was times that people wouldn't write Ballybrack on their address if they were going for a job. They'd write Clooney or Glenageary or something like that, or um, like because you were sort of looked down upon in some ways because of where you were from. Because these estates, a lot of them had mad problems in them, like, so I can identify with that a little bit. And there's other people across Ireland like who may not have grown up in housing estates, but they might have grown up some in other places where they might have had very little as well in their lives, or suffered other hardships in their lives. Like some, people suffer sicknesses and death, and to sometimes like to watch a loved one get an illness and die of an illness, like, leaves you brokenhearted. Like, and even just general love, like people's lives and love, like, I mean, you can be brokenhearted for probably the rest of your life sometimes with memories of a person. And they're the sorts of ones that, you see, I think there's a certain type of person that picks up the pipes, and there's a certain depth to people who pick up the pipes in the way that I'm talking about, that can express themselves. And I'm not saying that everyone has to be heartbroken or impoverished or sort of had a hard life. I don't mean it in that way, like, but it's sometimes you can get real pure and raw emotion out in a piper, and you don't know exactly what the circumstance is of that or where it's exactly coming from. But just, yeah, that phrase he said, like, kind of meant it all to me, because, like, I said to you before in another documentary, like, how to spot a good piper. What is a good piper? And as I say, it's the one that expresses themselves, like, lets the instrument speak for them, especially in the slow air. Like, to me, it's not a technical exercise. Like, that's robotic. It's mechanical. Anyone in theory can, like, learn something off and replicate it and learn a tune, but it's shallow. It's like, it's an echo of what it should be. It's, okay, it might look good, it might even sound good, but, and to me, a lot of like fast tunes and jigs and reels and dancey music and does that. Like, it's hard to put like lots of emotion into faster tunes. Like, they're not really designed for that. They were designed to entertain people and liven things up and get the spirit going or whatever like that. So that's when I say, you can tell, to me anyway, you can tell a great piper by the slow air. That's when that's the real depth, whether the person is connected really and emotionally and connected to the instrument. So I think anyway, in that respect, it doesn't, for things like that, deep emotions, I don't think quite often matters what your economic background was, although it may have made a difference in other ways in their lives or whatever. So anyway, just to sort of sum this up, Paddy Keenan to me is one of those rare examples of a piper who has that depth, who can convey that to you clearly, and that tradition as well that he comes from, like that travelling tradition, or Pavy. I don't even know, do they still say Pavy? Do people still say that for travelling people? Like but he's also, we see, he's also inherited this wealth of that difference. Like if there is a difference between the music of the travelling people and the music of the settled people, I mean, he's steeped in it. Like, I'm gonna do a whole other thing about the Cashes and the Dorans. They were travelling pipers from long ago, but like, just to sort of let you know that, like, I just have a little note written here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Paddy Keenan would be a 6th generation of a piper with a direct link to that pre-famine travelling past, both through his own family, like his father played the pipes, and also because of his father's friendship with Johnny Doran. Like, see, Johnny Doran played with Paddy's dad, and Paddy quite often says that you know, that Johnny Doran and that Johnny Doran's music was the greatest influence in his life on playing the uilleann pipes. And that's because I find that, like, really intriguing, because, like, Johnny Doran died in 1950, and just 2 years before he died in 1948, like, thankfully he recorded like one recording, as far as I know, in 1948, and then a few months later, like, the wall fell down on him in his trailer or caravan, and the next thing, he was paralysed, like, from his waist down, and he never really played again, as far as I know. So that means then that, like, that recording that was done of Johnny Doran in 1948, like Paddy must have listened to that, like, closely. Like, if he says that his music was the thing, well, Paddy wouldn't have heard his music directly except through this recording, but he'd have heard it through his father's piping, which his father, Paddy's father, John Keenan, also was an uilleann piper. And Paddy says in one of the interviews, he says he was a instrumentalist. And Paddy said that if his dad had in the book, that if his dad had stuck with the pipes, that he would have been one of the greatest pipers his dad would have been. So you see, there's this tradition there of Paddy's father playing with Johnny Doran, and this style of music then gets passed on down into Paddy Keenan. And just so as you know, like, when we talk about the music of Johnny Doran and the travelling people, like, we're actually going back to, like, way before the famine. Like, it all starts with a fella called John Cash, who was born in 1832. But even back before, like John Cash was a famous piper in his own time. He lived from like 1832 to 1906. But John Cash himself learned of his uncle, whose name was James Hanrahan. He learned music off his uncle. I'm not sure. Was James Hanrahan a piper, or maybe he was a fiddle player or a whistler. I'm not too sure. But either way, he played music, and he passed it down to John Cash, who was born in 1832. Now, John Cash was a teenager, living through the famine. And there's a great account of him playing his pipes for the funeral of two children in the famine in Wicklow, which I'm going to read out on another documentary, another ramblings thing that I do. So it all starts off before the famine with James Hanrahan, an uncle of John Cash. So that's taking us back probably to about 1810 sometime. In and around that time, this man would have been born, maybe 1800, 1810. Then he passes on, he's a traveller, and then he passes on his musical tradition to his nephew, who was John Cash, born in 1832. And he lived till 1906. So even, I'm going to have to do a whole other thing about this, because by 1906, uilleann pipers were few and far between. There was a real serious loss of the piping tradition, not just from travellers, from the whole of Ireland. And that's why they set up the Cork Pipers Club. I think it was 1898, and then the Dublin Pipers Club was 1900, where they were attempting to get all the last old pipers in Ireland together to restore this tradition, that it wouldn't die out. And it worked. Their idea worked. But just a quick little sort of the calibre of this. So John Cash, born in 1832, he had a son as well, a brilliant piper called James, or young Cash, they used to call him. And some even used to say he was a famous piper in his own right as well, in his own day. Some say that he was even better than his father. James was better than John Cash. But anyway, John had a daughter called Maggie Cash, who married a piper called John Doran. Right, so this is where the Doran connection comes in. So Maggie Cash, John Cash's daughter, marries John Doran, who was a piper himself. Then John Doran had a son called John Doran Jr., who was another piper himself. And then John Doran Jr. had another son called Johnny Doran, who was a piper. Johnny and Felix, two brothers. So this is the ancient sort of history. This is the vein, or the stream of history, that Paddy Keenan's tradition is coming from. Because then, as I said to you, then Johnny Doran was friends with Paddy Keenan's dad, and Paddy Keenan's dad was a piper, and they shared tunes, and they obviously taught, he taught him things, and they taught each other things. And then, so you have this living tradition being passed on from one generation to the next. And I don't know whether Paddy Keenan's family are related to the Dorans or not. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know enough about them. As I say, I don't even know the man himself. This is just stuff I've sort of learned, picked up. But so Paddy Keenan is the inheritor of that. So when he stops and he's being interviewed, and as I said, when I said to you about the silence behind those eyes, I'm hearing I'm hearing the tunes from long, long ago that were played by John Cash, who was born in 1832, and he played during the famine at the graves of children, because that tradition was passed right down from from father to son to nephew to friend by the campfire. And that's that's the heritage that's behind those quiet eyes, and that's what's in his mind. That's what pulses through his veins. He comes from a long tradition of that, and that's the tradition that he comes from, instead of the silver spoon and the feather bed. That's what he means, and that's what he's emanating out of his pipes. That's the depth that we go here. Sorry, I know we always go real mad deeply into things, but I think it's worth knowing, and I think it's worth sharing. And Um, that's the sort of respect that I have for that musical heritage and tradition. Um, as I say, there's a lot of great information in this book. I'm going to do more out of the book, read more chapters out of it. Plus, there's another book I'm reading about the history of Scottish bagpipes, the Highland pipes and Lowland pipes as well. There's more, there's lots more in-depth sort of historic documentary stuff coming, and rambles and chats with me along the way. So look, I know, like everything else, I'll do an introduction to something to pay tribute to somebody, but that's kind of about all I can say about the man. As I say, I've never been lucky enough to meet him. I've never been lucky enough to sit and have a pint with him and maybe ask him questions or learn things or whatever. So all I could do was just read from the books and get the best of clips of the documentaries that I had and roll it all together into one. So I hope you enjoyed this bit of an intro, and I hope you enjoyed the interviews with so just look on my station and it's like interviews with Paddy Keenan, and I'm sure you will enjoy them, and hopefully you might have learned a little bit just from me talking there, and maybe you'll come to it with a little bit more of an understanding. As I say, I'm learning all the time, and like I want to sort of help you to learn with me. Like there's a whole world about piping that just like people just don't get. It's not just an instrument. There's much more in that, and I like to sort of share the bits that I know and my like limited knowledge on it. As it says loads of times, look, I'm a nobody in the piping world. I'm a complete novice and a complete beginner. But I think like I want to understand it all more, and the depth that I want to even try and explain these depths that what this instrument means. So hopefully I can carry on making these, and hopefully you're enjoying them, and hopefully if you are enjoying them, give us a like or write a comment below. Or I don't do this for money, so I'm not going to say fund me on Patreon and send me donations and all. I don't give a shit about that. I just hope that someone else is getting uh, something out of these videos. Anyway, and I hope that you're enjoying them. Yeah, so keep your eye on the channel there. There's lots more coming up. As I say, I'm going to do another tribute to Finbar Fury as well, and because his is a very similar sort of piping style, and a very similar world of Paddy Keenan's style or world, or whatever, flavour of or feeling or mood of music that we can explore and develop. So I think, yeah, my next one, and I'll do another bit about those early pipers there, like I was mentioning, the Cashes and the Dorans as well. So over the next few weeks I'll do a little bit about each one of them. So anyway, that's all I can say. Hope you enjoyed that one, and talk to you soon. Okay, so this is from the book Free Spirits, Irish Travellers and Irish Traditional Music by Tommy Fagan and Oliver O'Connell. And again, I would highly encourage everyone who's interested in this topic to go out and get yourselves a copy of this book. It's absolutely priceless, and it's the only one of its kind. It's full of amazing information, um, just about the whole like subject of pipes, Uilleann pipe, and the travelling people, and not just the travelling people. It's the whole world of well, it's mainly centered around the travelling people and the traditional music associated with them. But it's a fantastic book, a real one of a kind. So as I say, I'd encourage everyone to go out and try and get a copy of it. At the moment, when I'm recording this, in September in 2001. The only place that I could find that sells it online is a shop called Custy's Traditional Music Shop, from Ennis in County Clare. So it's Custys, Custy's uh, Traditional Music Shop. Uh, Cook's Lane off O'Connor Street, Ennis, County Clare. So, as I say, that's where I got my copy of it, and I'd strongly recommend everyone go out and get yourselves a copy of this book while it's still in print. So, this is chapter 5 about the Keenans, an extraordinary musical dynasty. The Keenans were another musical Irish traveller family who, like the Furies, settled into Ballyfermot around the 1950s, and both families and their sons developed social, musical, and friendship bonds, which helped shape the direction and popularity of Irish traditional music over the succeeding decades. In Dublin in the late 1960s and early 1970s, a vibrant, exciting phase of Irish folk and traditional music was getting underway. The Furies, Dubliners, and the Keenans were prominent in the largely urban based revival, while Sean O'Riordan and his proteges in Ceoltóirí Coolan and the Chieftains were experimenting on the edge of the traditional boundaries and presenting new sounds to an eager audience. Then along came Planxty, pushing the possibilities of instrumental backing within the genre, just like Finbar and Eddie Fury had done in the early 60s. Planxty brought the second Planxty brought the sound of the Uilleann Pipes to a new, younger, urban-based audience. This was a new sound, controversial to the ears of some purists, but with the imprimatur of others, such as Seamus Ennis, mentor to Liam O'Flynn, Planxty's Uilleann Piper. Balladeers like Paddy Riley, Jim McCann, and Danny Doyle were packing in crowds in the old Sheeling in Dublin, operated by the irrepressible Bill Fuller. Crisscrossing the Atlantic during these decades, Tommy Makem and the Clancy brothers were maintaining the traditional approach to ballad singing, which depended on good old-fashioned vocal harmonies with minimum instrumentation. The Embankment in Tallaght was the folk mecca of the era, most memorable for the concerts which hosted the Botty Band, an exciting new format of Irish traditional music in which Paddy Keenan also awakened in many for the first time an appreciation of the music of the Uilleann Pipes. O'Donoghue's pub in Merrion Row, Dublin, was gaining national prominence as a venue for consistent, good quality, informal traditional music sessions. Ted McKenna was singing traditional songs of the working classes, honouring Larkin, Pearse, and Connolly, and with ironic paradox, infusing English ballads and sea shanties into the national repertoire. The sound of Paddy Keenan's Irish Uilleann Pipes, accompanying English sea shanties such as Go to Sea No More, with Paul Fury's sensitive and evocative Paolo soprano accordion accompaniment, was the stuff of unrehearsed improvisation nightly features in Paddy O'Donoghue's small back room in the early 1970s. At the same time, and often on the same night, legendary musicians like Seamus Ennis, Tommy Peoples, and Sean Keane were likely to drop in for the tune, with resident musicians John Kelly and John Ryan, exiles from Clare, keeping the drop pure up at the front of the bar. Across town in Slattery's in Capel Street, one could walk in any night and be totally enchanted by some of the best music ever heard. On the stage of on the stage on some of those nights, the Pavies, a raw, exciting traditional group led by John Keenan and his sons Brendan, Thomas, Paddy, and Johnny, were in full swing. Guesting with the Keenans on different nights were singers and musicians of the calibre of Liam Weldon, George and Paul Fury, Sean Garvey, Paddy Glacken, and others. One of the most memorable traditional recordings was a duet produced in the 1970s by Paddy Keenan and Paddy Glacken, simply called Dublin. That's Doublin. This recording has stood the test of time and is a constant reference CD for aspiring young pipers and fiddle players. Glacken is a dub of Donegal extraction, while Keenan's traveller roots are in Dublin, yet their music and backgrounds fused harmoniously, producing an awesome synergy that was magical to hear. Another aspect of this wonderful recording was the tight playing of both men, one from a traveller background and the other from the settled community. Their music has resonances of Doran and Clancy playing together, or the Rainies and the Keens of Galway. No prejudices here, just music binding together the two traditions. Oliver O'Connell's first encounter with the Keenan family took place in 1974 in Lisdoonvarna, County Clare. He well remembers a session in which crowds were packed in like sardines. In Ireland in 1974, fire regulations were practically non-existent, so you could have three times the legal crowd limit packed into a lounge bar for the wild music sessions that were so much in vogue at the time. Quote, this is from Oliver O'Connell, 2010. Suddenly, without warning, we heard the sound of the uilleann pipes in a far corner of the bar. First, the continuous hum of the drones, and then the magical melody played on the chanter by a tall figure, surrounded by an adoring crowd, head bowed, hair flowing down at either side of his features, and music just flowing out like an Amazonian waterfall. The audience in the packed lounge that night was spellbound by the lonesome piper as he gave full vent to the tunes he played. It was the first time O'Connell had heard Colonel Fraser, one of the big reels to be found in the repertoire of most Irish traveller musicians. On this night, to an unsuspecting audience, it was unleashed by Paddy Keenan. Like countless others that night, O'Connell was hooked on the sound of the pipes, played in a style not known to many, an Irish traveller style of piping, traceable back to the early 19th century to John Cash, the traveller horse dealer from Wexford, who was the patriarch of the Doran dynasty. There was something so special in the music Keenan produced. His whole persona had a mystique, both in terms of his appearance and his undoubted skill on the pipes. Paddy had developed a cult following in the early 1970s, and people flocked to any venue where he was playing. The famous Botti Band was just taking a hold on the Irish traditional music scene at the time, and Paddy was crucial to their new sound. Paddy was a member of a very musical family, and his siblings were accomplished musicians. Their father, John Keenan, was born in County Westmeath, and he married Mary Bravender from Cavan. They had four sons, Paddy, Johnny, Brendan, and Thomas, and two daughters, Eileen and Angela. The Keenan clan moved into 116 Oranmore Road, Ballyfermot, Dublin, sometime around 1958, in close proximity to the Furies, who were living in nearby 116 Cladder Road. The bond of friendship between Ted Fury and John Keenan was very close. Both men were musicians. They enjoyed fishing, a few pints, and they each had four sons steeped in the traveller music culture. The Keenan and Fury boys to this day are as close as any family, and Finbar refers to the Keenans as his brothers. Paddy is the most prominent member of the Keenan family, due initially to his critical role in the iconic Botti Band of the 1970s. The Botti Band burst into the Irish traditional music scene in 1974, and for the few short years that they were in existence, they raised the tempo to a breathtaking level and introduced a new template for tune arrangements that continue to be the standard for emerging new groups.
Their unique, exhilarating sound was driven by its three lead players, Matt Molloy, Tommy Peoples, and Paddy Keenan, while Donal Lunny, Micheál and Tríona Ní Dhomhnaill provided the strong rhythm and accompaniment which was so distinctive and unique. They brought traditional music to new heights, as far as the tradition would allow, teasingly close to rock and roll without diluting its integrity. But most agree that it was Keenan's pulsating, attacking sound on the uilleann pipes that sets the Botties in a league of their own. Nearly 40 years later, Keenan continues to mesmerise crowds with his inimitable, unique traveller style of uilleann piping. Quote, I met with him after one of his excellent gigs in Dowlan's in Limerick in 2010, and while in the 1970s Paddy did not talk much, nowadays he is a great communicator and always eager to share his experiences. That's O'Connell, Ennis, 2009. Paddy talks openly about his three brothers, Brendan, Tommy, his late brother Johnny Keenan, and his dad John Keenan, who was a multi-instrumentalist and played the pipes. Paddy maintains that if his dad concentrated on the pipes, he would have been a brilliant piper. He also spoke lovingly of his dad's friendship with Ted Fury and recalled how they would spend their time fishing and busking. Paddy had boundless respect and admiration for Finbar Fury and talks of Finbar's skill on the uilleann pipes and of the wonderful childhood they shared. The Keenan patriarch, John Keenan, knew and played with Johnny Dordan. They camped, worked and played together. Keenan subsequently was determined that he would have a piper in the family. Such was his infatuation with Dordan. He designated Paddy as the piper, but Paddy readily admits that his brother Johnny was a better piper. The Dordan mantle, however, fell to Paddy simply because Johnny was quicker on his feet at getting out to play when practice time came around in the Keenan household. Johnny was not prepared to dedicate the time required to learn the intricacies of the instrument. Old John Keenan was a tough taskmaster, particularly where music was concerned, and he could not understand why a learner could not get it right the first time. You would get a slap from him if you got it wrong, Paddy recalled. Those were the times that were in it. You got slapped in school and you got slapped at home. You were given a hard upbringing because you had to be tough in the Pavy world. That was Paddy Keenan quoted in 2010. As part of our research for this publication, we inquired about other dominant traveller families, and Paddy remembered the Keenans, Joyces, McDonaghs, Mons, and McCanns. The bigger the family name, the more powerful they were. This is what we were brought up to face and be prepared for, he said. So the uilleann pipes was going to be my ticket, and my dad disciplined me, while my brothers now had more freedom to go out and play. I was the piper, and Johnny was a banjo player, and a great player. The Furies were living in Ballyfermot before the Keenans moved in sometime in the 1950s. Paddy recalled the sense of musical exploration and collaboration between the two families. In 1959, Finbar Fury moved in to live with us, and it was bedlam after that. Any chance of a decent education went out the window, as we would be playing music until all hours of the morning. My dad was in his element. We were blowing chanters and whistles constantly. I would be up listening to this constant music. Johnny strumming along to my dad, and also Tommy Ryan would arrive, the only man with a tape recorder, and we would have a great session. We were up until 6 o'clock in the morning, and then we had to go to school. Our house got the name Radio 116 Oranmore Road. We had to make quiet reads for the pipes because the neighbours were complaining about the noise. The Keenan household in Oranmore Road, Ballyfermot, was a virtual traditional music paradise, with Brendan, Thomas, Paddy, Johnny and John Sr. and Finbar Fury playing incredible Irish music together for days at a time. Brendan and Thomas Keenan still live in Ballyfermot. Both men are excellent uilleann pipers and fantastic whistle players. All the brothers recognise the unique musical heritage they inherited from their dad, John Sr. The Keenan's mother was Mary Bravender, and she played a little on the accordion, and the Keenan sisters, Angela and Eileen, also played whistles. Paddy Keenan. Paddy Keenan talked about the difference in the music that was played by people who were of a traveller background. Paddy attributed the difference to the respective contexts of lifestyles of travellers and settled people. He said, music brings out the difference because music is a mood, and you reflect the mood in your music. Sorrow, pain, rejection, hardship. It has to come out, and the music is the vehicle to project those emotions. He stated that if he was asked to play like somebody else, he could probably do it, but he said that not everyone could play like he plays unless they have experienced what he has experienced. Mickey Dunn makes a similar point in his description of the traveller's style of playing in chapter 7. Quote, this is Paddy. I was at a wedding recently in Inishboffin. Now, I don't know who said this, but anyway, it's a quote. I was at a wedding recently in Inishboffin and I played with Liam O'Flynn. We played nice music, and then when I played on my own, my mood kicked in and the music was different. I'd say Paddy said that. Anyway, Paddy went on to talk about the young musicians today and mentioned in particular Michael O'Connell from County Clare, who he observed has incredible execution, ornamentation and control of the pipes, an outstanding musician in his opinion. He also mentioned that there are several other young pipers who have a mature mood in their playing, and that you can see how they were influenced by Johnny Dorden. Paddy confirmed that Johnny Dorden was the greatest influence of all time on his playing. He also has a high regard for Felix Dorden's piping, and he is delighted about the number of young pipers today who want to do what the Dordens were doing. Paddy is flattered that there are young pipers now who model their playing on his, and he hopes that this will help them learn how to turn the tune in different directions. This will be fantastic for them in later years when they have developed their own style and moods and can incorporate these extras into their playing. These technical embellishments are useful when not overdone and can add something extra to the playing. I remember teaching a class when I was in my 30s, and a little boy about 11 years old made a little mistake and he blushed because he was playing for me. That night I was playing and I used his mistake, which became a very effective ornamentation. Someone pointed out that I did not play it like that today, and I said, I know, I got that note from the little boy. Well, he went crimson with embarrassment, but the note worked in the right context. His note was a mistake, but I gave it back to him as an add-on to his playing. Paddy says no to the Beatles. Paddy went to London in the late 1960s and took a break from the music for 3 years. I played guitar and sang and busked in London. It was a hippie world at that time. I tried to pawn my pipes one time, but eventually gave them to a friend because there was a certain embarrassment in being part of this hippie world. I spent a lot of time busking and singing on the London Underground. The Beatles were in vogue and their management made contact with me. They wanted a new sound and the pipes were a possibility. And someone had told them that I was a piper who would be suitable for this new sound. Grattan Puxton was the head of the World Gypsy Association and his wife was involved in the Beatles' management. And they were sending a limo for me in London, and I walked away from it. I'm still walking away, he said with a hearty laugh. Paddy decided the morning of the rehearsals in Abbey Road with the Beatles that he would go off busking in the underground instead, and he did. He recalled fondly the Botty Band years and the fantastic music of the 70s. He has regrets that today they are not able to capitalise on their popularity due to management decisions and legal difficulties that have plagued them since. He is thrilled that the Botty Band sound is as popular today as it was in the 70s, and is amazed at the vast number of young musicians who play the Botty Band tunes at every opportunity. Paddy currently lives in America, tours extensively all over the world, and his popularity with followers of Irish traditional music is as strong as ever. He has recently been to Timbuktu in Mali, Vietnam and New Zealand, and Tokyo. He enjoys performing still and has no plans to stop playing. Undoubtedly, the upbringing in Ballyfermot in the 1960s and 1970s, under the careful tuition of his dad, prepared him for the life he now leads. Living in close proximity to the Furies was another major advantage, and the times he spent performing with the Pavies was an influential period in his musical development. He is an iconic institution who was recognised for his talents and contribution to Irish traditional music when he was awarded the T.G. Cahir Gradam Ceol Award in the Cork Opera House in 2002. He is known and acknowledged all over the world as probably one of the greatest pipers of all time, keeping the piping flame lit by Cash and Doran alight and appreciated by a whole new Irish global family. When Paddy Keenan is on stage and strikes up the Kesh jig or the Ballantar fancy, the mood in the hall changes to excitement and appreciation of a truly great piper, carrying on the proud traveller music tradition. Listen to either of his brothers, Thomas or Brendan, on uilleann pipes, and you get that same sense of something different, something exciting and extraordinary in their music. The Keenan brothers have left an indelible stamp on Irish traditional music, just as the Dorans, Duns, Dohertys and Rainey's before them. Lovers of Irish music all over the world owe a huge debt to this family from Ballyfermot in Dublin.